All right, so the book that we read this month, it really addresses a lot of common issues that a lot of businesses experience. And I highly recommend it for anyone who's at a manager level or above, because this book will address some of those common things that many businesses are really struggling with. This month, when it was my turn on the team to pick what book we were going to read for our monthly book review, and I was looking through different topics, and I was thinking about what is it that is in our business that we can really focus on and improve. And one of the things that I talked about in some of our core value videos that I did a couple months ago is one of our things we wanted to work on was really getting people to be more solution oriented, because our core value for the month of May is solution oriented. Because we ran into this situation where a lot of people were really depending on me to solve problems for them, and they were depending on, let's say, the finance director to solve and answer problems for them. And I realized, I said, you know what, we're not going to be able to build a scalable business if everybody is relying on me as a CEO, or if the accounting team is relying on the finance director to answer questions for them. Like, we needed to get to a point where people in the organization at every level within the organization can focus on being solution oriented, meaning don't just bring me your problems. What are your suggestions? What are your options? What are your potential solutions that you want to recommend? Because if you can bring potential solutions, we can probably be more productive, and that's less stress on the CEO and the finance director, and everybody can get involved with the solution. So that was what I was thinking. Okay, all right, what book can go in line with that? And this month we picked the Self-Leadership book by Dr. Spencer. Now, this is part of the 1 Minute Manager series, and so I really like the way that they tell the stories, and they really do it in a story format. It's not like what I call a textbook business book. When I say textbook, meaning like they talk about a lot of theory, they explain a lot of concepts, but this one, they actually explain the concepts in the form of a story. And so the character in the story is, you have a middle manager that is working at a advertising agency. And in the beginning of the book, we are sitting in the boardroom with this manager, and he is finally delivering the ad strategy campaign to one of their important clients. And he's sitting in the room and he delivers a presentation and he's getting feedback from the clients, and the main voice in the room looks at him and says, "This is horrible. I don't like it." And immediately he goes into this downward spiral, because he recognizes that if this person in the room isn't happy, they're probably going to lose the client. And he does what so many other people have done, is they go down this road of blaming other people around them about, it was the creative team, they wouldn't cooperate with me, or it was the client's fault because the client wouldn't give me the answers to the questions that I had, or it was this person's fault. And when I read that in the book, I said, oh my gosh, like, I have lived through that in our own business, where there was a period of time where an issue came up and everybody was pointing fingers different directions. And one of the things that I had to recognize is, hey, this is not a them problem, this is a leadership problem. And I had to take ownership of that, to say, hey, if people are blaming other people for the problem that they probably could have taken some ownership for, then what that probably means is I haven't demonstrated to the team how it looks to actually take ownership of the things that we do have control over. And the rest of the book talks about this marketing manager as he tends to meet some very interesting people who help him go down this road of understanding, like, how do you take self-leadership? Like, how do you get out of this rut of blaming other people for what's going on? And how do you really start to focus on, hey, what can I do to actually take self-leadership in this situation? Because when you get really good at taking self-leadership, what then tends to happen is your self-leadership then starts to impact other people around you. And so one of the things that I did in putting this into practice several months before I actually read the book was when I noticed that people on the team were blaming other people for what was going on, I said, hey, here is the thing. If there is a problem that comes up, we as individuals and as a team need to identify what are the necessary changes that need to happen for us to get better results. Because at the end of the day, finding the person to blame isn't going to fix the problem. Finding the person to blame may make you feel better or may make you feel at ease about the situation, but it isn't going to actually solve the problem. And now, we're an accounting firm. We provide bookkeeping and CFO services, so our clients are not looking to us to find who to blame, why they have financial problems or why something wasn't done. Our clients are looking to us to provide answers and solutions. And so as I began to read that book, it reminded me of the journey that I went on myself within our organization of really changing that mentality from being a problem-finding culture to actually being a solution-oriented culture. And I will tell you, it is not an easy process, but I think the book does a good job of pointing out some of the things that you need to change in the mindset. For example, there is a story or a scenario in the book where the author is going through this process and he's meeting these different mentors who can help him. And someone puts a card down on the table and says, hey, let me see one of your business cards. They put the business card on the table and they say, hey, your objective is to cut a hole in this business card that is big enough to fit around your head. Now, most people, if you're looking at a business card, it's probably like that big, which means the business card is significantly smaller than your head. But in the book, he goes through all of the emotions that everyone else of us would have is that can't be done, or there's no way to do that, this is ridiculous, I don't want to do this, I don't want to participate. Like all the things that a lot of times we see in our organizations where an idea comes up and people just start talking about how bad the idea is, or they start talking about all the reasons why they can't do it. And then in the book, it talks about how someone was able to solve that problem and they were able to take that small business card and cut it in a way that it actually fit around his head with ease. And I was a bit shocked when I read that part in the book because I was just like, oh, that's a great idea. But one of the things that it emphasizes is about thinking out of the box. And I'll give you a very clear example about something we were working on in our business. So I used to host a podcast called the Finance and Accounting Show. And I've hosted multiple podcasts. So like right now, we host a podcast called Law Firm and Finance because one of our biggest growth areas are working with law firms. And so I do a podcast called Law Firm and Finance. I also lead the law practice podcast for the ABA. And then I'm also the CEO of a company running other things and doing speaking engagements. This year, I have 27 speaking engagements. So we're very busy. And we decided that, hey, we were going to stop doing the Finance and Accounting Show podcast. Now, the interesting thing about this is the Finance and Accounting Show podcast is probably based on the downloads and the research we've seen is it performs in the top 10% of all podcasts within the accounting and finance genre. So it was a very big decision for us to say no to it because it's a top performing podcast. So I took about a 13-month break from that podcast. And we looked at even last month, which means there's been almost a year since I've released a new episode on that podcast. And even last month, based on the downloads that came in, the podcast is still in the top 25%. And I haven't released an episode for an entire year. And so one of the things that I brought to the team is, hey, how do we continue to do all the other stuff that we're doing. Like, we're putting out tons of content. Like, we probably put out maybe 45 pieces of content a week across multiple social media and medium platforms. We're doing a ton. And I said, what if we added another podcast to it, which means not only the podcast, which means going to be highlight clips, which means going to be shorts and reels for different platforms. So adding one more show probably means we're going to add about 7 additional pieces of content per week. So we'll go over 40, and probably into 50 plus pieces of content that we're releasing a week. And it's like, how do we manage that? And at first, the team said, we don't think we should do it. It's going to be distracting. And I said, all right. I let that settle for maybe a couple of weeks. But then something about it just kept coming back up. And I was like, you know what, no. We got to be able to think outside the box on this. What can we do to actually make this work? Don't give me all the reasons why it can't work. Give me reasons why it could work, or what would we need to change to make it work? And when I started asking that question, it completely changed the conversation. Because what it did is it got the team to start thinking from a different perspective. We started thinking from a solution-oriented perspective, as opposed to thinking about why it wouldn't work or thinking about potential problems. And so that is something that we've experienced ourselves, and I completely understand when other people are going through it as well, because it is much easier to talk about why something won't work as opposed to taking ownership and taking self-leadership to figure out how do we come up with some potential solutions. And what ended up happening is we came up with a very clear solution. We came up with an idea to use a platform where I can create the content and we don't have to do any post-production editing. I would create the content, we would cut the episodes down to 15 minutes, and then we would use an editing software called Descript to then create the clips, the reels, the highlights, the captions, the copy, all of the stuff that we needed to create. And then for a segment that used to require a lot of research, like we used to do a segment called Tax Tea, where we would look at IRS criminal enforcement cases, and we would break down what happened in the case, what advice we would give to business owners to avoid finding themselves in a IRS criminal case. And what we decided to do is, what if we use AI to create that segment of the show? Meaning, there are different AI platforms out there, and what we did is we took the case, we loaded it into the AI tool in less than 5 minutes, created a 5-minute long podcast of 2 people having a conversation about that case and different tips and lessons that accountants and individual business owners can keep in mind so that they don't find themselves falling into that same issue. By thinking outside of the box, we were able to solve our capacity problem. And then by fixing the capacity problem for us to be able to restart the finance and accounting show, we were also able to use some of those same concepts to fix some of our other bottlenecks in other content, to where now we're able to do even more content on less time, because we were willing to take that same analogy of take a business card, cut it in a circle that fits around your head. And when we use that same concept, we were able to solve some really big problems. I would say the book Self-Leadership is a great book for you to read, especially if you at a manager level or higher. Self-Leadership by Dr. Spencer is a great book that you should pick up. Plus, if you're listening to it on the audio, normally it's about maybe 2 hours on an audiobook. Now, I tend to listen to things sped up, so for me, it was maybe an hour and 15 minutes to listen to the entire book. But it was great wisdom, great insight, so I highly recommend checking this book out. Hey, thanks for tuning in.